Greetings, and welcome to our brief introduction to Greek history. Today we'll be exploring two aspects of this ancient art: the context for the development of Greek tragedy, and the structure you are most likely to find in any good old Greek tragedy. We're going to focus specifically on the form of tragedy that developed in Athens. So, ready? Let's go! Fun fact! Did you know that the word tragedy actually comes from two ancient Greek words, tragos, meaning goat, and aoide, meaning song? So, what could a goat song possibly have to do with Greek tragedy? Well, ancient Greek priests used to worship the god Dionysius, the god of wine and fertility, by singing hymns to him while they were disguised as satyrs or goats. These priests would sing stories drawn from Dionysius' life and adventures in a fertility ritual that included bringing wine, vines, goats, figs, and even a phallus. All these symbols are associated with the worship of Dionysus. As these rituals of worship progressed through time, they would become more elaborate, with the hymns telling longer and longer stories, and even individuals taking on different characters from these stories. Lo and behold, this was the birth of ancient Greek theater. So now to the great polis of ancient Athens. The ancient Athenians held an annual festival in honor of Dionysus called the Dionysia, and the central event of this festival was a performance of tragedies and comedies in a competition. Tragedians like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus would compose a series of plays which usually consisted of 3 tragedies and a satyr play to be presented in these contests. Fun fact, the Greek word for contest is agon, and this is where we get our English word agony. I guess when we engage in a contest, there's a lot of agony and suffering. Okay, so it's maybe not such a fun fact. Anyway, back to our lesson. Originally, in a Greek tragedy, there were no individual characters. The entire story, or rather goat song, was performed by a group of people known as a chorus. As Greek theater evolved, a playwright by the name of Thespis decided to add to the chorus by introducing a main character who would interact with the chorus and speak individual lines. This individual was known as the protagonist, or first agonist. Fun fact, Thespis gives us the English word thespian. You can imagine what a trend this started. Later on, Aeschylus would add a second character, which he called the deuteragonist. This created more opportunities for interaction on stage between characters and between the characters and the chorus. Well, if you've got 2 agonists, why not add a third? Along came Sophocles, who decided that occasionally adding a third actor, called the tritagonist, could help heighten the dramatic effect in important scenes. So there you have it. Greek tragedy went from having just a chorus sing, dance, and tell a story to a form of tragedy we're more familiar with today. You may be interested to learn that, according to many scholars, the emergence of Athenian theater as an art form coincided with the rise of democracy in Athens. For more on Athenian democracy, feel free to check out our other video. It's actually not that far-fetched an idea when you think about it. Democracy in Athens allowed for ordinary and leading citizens to discuss and debate issues concerning their city-state. The theater provided a perfect parallel venue in which Athenians could explore these issues in a symbolic manner. Ideas could be played out and debated in front of a large segment of the population who would later be voting on the direction of their city-state. Now that you have an idea of how Greek tragedy developed, you're probably wondering, what would I see if I attended an ancient performance? Let's start with where you would find yourself, the theater, or theatron. Theatron is just a Greek word meaning a place for seeing. In the theatron, you would find yourself seated most often in seats cut out of an inclined hill, like this famous theater at Parados. The center of the theatron consisted of the orchestra, which was a large semicircular space or circular space on which the chorus sang and danced. To the left and right of this, you find the Parados. This is a way by which the chorus would enter the theater on its way to the orchestra. Just behind the orchestra, you see a background building originally made of wood and later on stone that connects the platform stage area in which costumes were stored. This background area originally started out as just a tent, and the Greek word for tent is skene, and this gives us our English word scene. Now that you've got your bearings, how does putting on a Greek tragedy work? Well, first of all, you need someone called a choregos. While the state paid the actors' salaries, the additional expenses incurred by a play's production were often taken on by the choregos. This was the manager of the chorus, who was not only in charge of finding members for the chorus, its costumes and props, but also in charge of funding the playwright who composed the tragedy. To the Athenians, helping fund public festivals and buildings, often with your own money, was part and parcel of being a good citizen. So, once you've got a play to work with, it's time to involve the koryphaios, or leader of the chorus. This was usually a professional singer and dancer who would work with the group of 12 individuals forming the chorus. At this point, you may be wondering, who made up the members of the chorus and the agonists? Well, without getting too much into detail, all the actors on the stage would have been men. They wore masks and costumes that would show the character they played. It's a lot like what happened during Shakespearean times. Now you have your play all ready to go. What is it actually like to watch a play? Well, the experience was quite dramatic. First of all, you would most likely be attending the play in broad daylight, since ancient Greek theaters were open-air theaters, and there was no fancy lighting equipment. Ancient Greek tragedies also followed a set structure quite closely. They started off with something called a prologue. This introductory part of the tragedy usually establishes the action or gives important background information to set the scene, as it were. Next came the big entrance by the chorus, and this is important because the chorus, you'll recall, was originally at the heart of the tragedy, so they're really at the center of this entire play. In fact, the chorus played a very crucial role in how a play unfolded. It often acted as an agent giving advice, asking or taking part in decisions in the play. It helped establish the ethical framework by which the action is going to be judged. During the play, the chorus would often react in a manner in which the playwright anticipates the audience would react. So, if the playwright thinks that the audience will be shocked by a particular course of action, he'll have the chorus react in the same way. It's kind of like the opposite equivalent to a laugh track on a sitcom. The chorus is also responsible for setting the mood and heightening the dramatic effect of particular moments. And finally, since the chorus sang and danced, it helped with the pacing of the play by adding movement, song, and dance. Everything's always a little more special when you add some music and dance. So, the prologue has just finished delivering its introduction when the music starts, and in comes the chorus to deliver what's called the Parados, or entrance song. It did so by coming through the, you guessed it, Parados in the theater. When the lovely song and dance are over, the main action begins with what's known as an episode. You may have heard of this term before. It's often associated with television series where each show, when the story moves forward, is called an episode. Well, the same thing applies here. A Greek play consisted of many pieces that featured the chorus, known as choral odes. That's usually when the chorus takes the time to reflect on what's just happened in the previous episode. They also comment on it, ask questions, offer advice, or take part in a decision. And between each choral ode, you have the episodes moving the story forward. Seeing a choral ode in action is a kind of a neat experience. The ode itself is divided often into a few different parts. You have the strophe, literally a turning, when the chorus would sometimes literally turn in a certain direction while singing and dancing. The other part is called the antistrophe, or counter-turning, when the chorus would turn in another direction, physically or metaphorically, in its ode. The play develops as the episodes and choral odes progress one after the other. Before the end of the tragedy, you're likely to see something called a komos, or song of lament, usually sung by one actor and sometimes accompanied by the chorus. Well, this kind of makes sense since you're watching a tragedy after all. Alright, so the action has progressed between episode and choral ode, and you're reaching the end of the tragedy. As you can well imagine, something dramatic usually happens, causing the entire thing to unfold before our eyes. This is known as the peripeteia, which is a sudden reversal of fortune, or change in circumstances of a character. Aristotle explains that peripeteia occurs when a character produces an effect that's opposite to that which he intended to produce. Another way in which the ending of a tragedy can be brought about is through Anagnorisis, which Aristotle describes as a character's change from ignorance to knowledge. He argues that the best plots combine these two as part of the cause and effect chain, with peripeteia leading to anagnorisis on the part of the character, ending in his or her eventual downfall. At the end of the tragedy, it's often the chorus that helps close things out with its final ode called the exodos, or after song. They then exit the theater, and the audience member is left with a sense of emotional release after having lived through this harrowing experience with the characters in chorus. This purging of emotions after a sometimes roller coaster of a journey is known as catharsis. I'm going to quote Barbara McManus here, as she explains it quite well. Catharsis means a purging, and Aristotle seems to be employing a medical metaphor. Tragedy arouses the emotions of pity and fear in order to purge away their excess, to reduce these passions to a healthy, balanced proportion. Aristotle also talks of the pleasure that is proper to tragedy, apparently meaning the aesthetic pleasure one gets from contemplating the pity and fear that are aroused through an intricately constructed work of art. End quote. So, there in a nutshell is some basic information about how the tradition of Greek theater emerged in Athens, and some of the basic structures you would be most likely to find in what Aristotle deemed a well-constructed tragedy. One final fact to leave you with. You may have noticed some similarities between Greek tragedy and opera. Think of the theater settings and the operatic structure. Both also traditionally feature choral pieces punctuated by episodes in which individual characters sing or recite, thereby advancing the plot. And both traditionally feature song and dance. In fact, the modern opera started out as an attempt to resurrect the elements of ancient Greek theater. Armed with this knowledge, we hope you'll be able to enjoy your next reading of an ancient Greek tragedy. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.